October night in 1994, in the quiet suburbs of Irving, Texas, 29-year-old Megan Beth Johns was enjoying the privacy and comfort of her small apartment on Saddlehorn Drive. She had moved there only months earlier, hoping for a fresh start, a stable job, a peaceful community, and the kind of independence she had always dreamed of. Friends described Megan as gentle, shy, but full of kindness. She didn't go out much, didn't make noise, didn't attract trouble. She was the kind of neighbor people liked instantly, polite, humble, friendly, and always willing to help. No one imagined that behind the closed door of her apartment, Megan was living the final hours of her life. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and check the link in the description to our Telegram, where we upload rare case files and photos that YouTube often restricts. By early October 1994, Megan's routine was simple. Work, home, occasional visits with friends. Nothing unusual. But on the night of October 4th, something happened inside her apartment that would turn a quiet neighborhood into a crime scene and launch one of the most haunting cold cases in Texas history. The next morning, when Megan didn't show up for work, co-workers became concerned. Calls went unanswered. Hours passed. Finally, police were sent to her apartment for a welfare check. When officers entered the living room, they froze. Megan Beth Johns was lying face down on the floor, motionless, surrounded by blood. She had been stabbed repeatedly, a violent, frenzied attack that suggested rage, not robbery. There were no signs of forced entry. The door wasn't broken. The windows were intact. Nothing appeared stolen. This meant one thing. Megan had let her killer in. Someone she trusted, or at least someone she knew, stabbed her to death inside her own home. Detectives immediately canvassed the area. Neighbors reported nothing unusual except one detail. Megan's next-door neighbor, a young man named Daryl Patrick Goggins, had been acting strangely both before and after the murder. But in 1994, there was not enough evidence to link anyone to the scene. DNA technology was still in its early years. Investigators collected biological samples, fingerprints, fibers, but nothing matched any known suspect. Without forced entry, without eyewitnesses, without confessions, the case began to crumble. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, then years. By the late 1990s, the murder of Megan Johns became one of the many tragic files stored in the Irving Police Department's cold case archives. Her family continued to beg for justice. Her mother wrote letters every year asking detectives if anything new had been found. Friends kept Megan's memory alive, visiting her grave, telling stories, but with each passing year the hope of solving the case dimmed. For more than 2 decades, the killer lived freely, while Megan's family lived with heartbreak. But cold cases have a way of waking up when the world least expects it. In the 2020s, the Irving Police Department formed a new forensic review unit, a team dedicated to revisiting old evidence with modern DNA technology. In early 2025, one of the detectives reopened Megan's file. They sent everything, swabs, clothing, biological traces, to a state lab equipped with next-generation genetic testing far more advanced than anything available in the 1990s. After months of analysis, the results came back. And they were shocking. The DNA found at the crime scene matched Daryl Patrick Goggins, Megan's neighbor at the time of the murder. The same man whose name had floated in the original investigation but could not be tied to the evidence. The same man who had slipped through the cracks for 30 years. With the DNA match confirmed, an arrest warrant was issued. In June 2025, police tracked Goggins down and took him into custody. After decades of silence, decades of uncertainty, decades of grief, Megan's family finally received the news they had prayed for. The arrest of Goggins opened a new chapter, but also raised unsettling questions. Why did he kill her? What happened inside the apartment that night? Was it a sudden argument? A predatory attack? A moment of rage? Police have not yet revealed the full motive, but investigators believe the crime was personal, not random. Megan let him in. She wasn't afraid. She likely didn't see him as a threat, until it was too late. The new arrest also revealed something chilling. For 30 years, Goggins lived an ordinary life, blending into society, while the memory of Megan's murder slowly faded from public view. He moved, worked, interacted with people, all while carrying a secret that only modern DNA could expose. As the case heads toward trial, the courtroom will become the final stage in a journey that lasted more than 3 decades. Prosecutors will present the DNA evidence, the preserved crime scene details, and the timeline that places Goggins near the apartment on the night of the murder. The defense will attempt to explain away the forensic match, but after 30 years, science now speaks louder than anything else. And for Megan's family, justice, delayed, but not denied, is finally within reach. The murder of Megan Beth Johns stands as a reminder of two powerful truths. First, sometimes the most dangerous person is the one who lives just a few feet away, behind the wall next to yours. And second, no matter how much time passes, no matter how cold the case becomes, the truth has a way of resurfacing. DNA never forgets. Megan didn't deserve what happened to her. Her life was quiet, gentle, and full of potential. But her story proves that forgotten victims can still be heard when science, persistence, and time finally intersect. On the night of October 15, 2011, the city of Newnan, Georgia moved gently through the warm autumn air. Homecoming dances had just ended, teenagers in dress clothes laughed under streetlights, and parents waited in cars along quiet suburban roads. Among them was 17-year-old Blake Tyler Chappell, a kind, polite, easygoing teenager who had just spent the night celebrating with his friends and his girlfriend. It was meant to be a perfect evening, one of those memorable high school moments people cherish for years. But for Blake, it became the last night he was ever seen alive. After the dance, Blake stayed overnight at his girlfriend's house. Everything felt ordinary. They relaxed, shared stories from the evening, and talked about school and plans for the coming weeks. In the early hours of the morning, around 5 a.m., on October 16th, Blake quietly left the house to walk home. A short while later, he sent a final message saying he was almost home. It was the last communication he ever made. When Blake didn't return later that morning, concern built quickly. His phone went silent. Calls went unanswered. Friends checked everywhere they could think of. His mother contacted the police soon after. Search teams combed the streets and wooded areas. Nothing was found. No clothing, no belongings, no evidence of a struggle. Blake had simply disappeared in the early morning darkness, leaving behind a mystery that shook the entire community. For 2 long months, Newnan lived in fear and uncertainty. Theories spread through the town. Volunteers formed search groups, hoping to find even the smallest piece of information. Police interviews produced conflicting fragments but no solid leads. Blake had no enemies, no involvement in dangerous activities, no reason to vanish. It was a disappearance without logic, without explanation. Everything changed on December 19, 2011. A jogger passing near a shallow creek behind Summer Grove Parkway noticed something in the water. At first glance it looked like discarded debris, but as he approached, he understood what it truly was. Authorities arrived and confirmed the discovery. The body of a young man, partially submerged, shirtless, and wearing only underwear. It was Blake Chappell. An autopsy revealed he had been shot in the head. This single moment turned a missing person case into a homicide, unraveling the final thread of hope the family had held onto. Investigators searched tirelessly for answers. They studied Blake's last movements, analyzed his messages, interviewed neighbors and passers-by, and re-examined everything collected in the early days of the investigation. But again, nothing pointed to a solid suspect. The murder seemed motiveless, random, and alarmingly precise. With time, the case grew cold. Years passed. Blake's friends grew older, graduated, left their hometowns, but they never forgot him. His family fought to keep the investigation alive, even as months stretched into a decade. His file remains stored in the cold case archives of Newnan, a reminder of a bright young life cut short without explanation. Then, in 2025, the silence finally broke. A newly assigned detective in the cold case division reopened Blake's file. Unlike previous reviews, he noticed something. A man named Scotty Elliott Smith, who lived near the creek in 2011, had unexplained inconsistencies in his original statements. Records revealed a history of violent behavior that had not been fully examined at the time. When the detective re-interviewed witnesses and revisited old evidence, new pieces began to align. A resident admitted hearing gunshots near the creek during the early morning hours when Blake disappeared, a detail previously unreported. Combined with Smith's proximity and his past, the suspicion intensified. Smith was brought in for questioning once again. After nearly 14 years of silence, the pressure finally collapsed his composure. In 2025, he confessed to murdering Blake Chappell. His arrest closed one of Newnan's most heartbreaking chapters. The confession did not bring back what was lost, but it delivered the answer that Blake's family had waited more than a decade to hear. The motive behind the murder has not yet been fully released to the public, but investigators believe the encounter was sudden, violent, and unexpected. Blake simply crossed paths with the wrong person in the wrong moment. Blake's story remains a tragic reminder of how quickly a peaceful night can shift into unimaginable horror, how dangerous the world can be even in quiet suburbs, and how crucial persistence is in solving cold cases. His memory continues to live on through those who knew him, and through the relentless efforts of investigators who refuse to let the truth stay buried. Some mysteries fade as years pass. This one didn't, because justice, even delayed, still found its way. On the cold morning of June 13, 2006, in the quiet farming district of Wangoom near Warrnambool, Victoria, 36-year-old Christopher Jarvis walked out of his rural home and stepped into a mystery that would haunt Australia for nearly 2 decades. Jarvis was a hard-working father, known for his calm nature and simple routine. Friends describe him as reliable, humble, and devoted to his family. There was nothing about his life that suggested danger, conflict, or any involvement in crime. Yet within hours of leaving his home, he vanished, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a silence that stretched for years. Later that same day, authorities found his car abandoned and burned at Thunder Point, a rugged and picturesque coastal lookout known for its cliffs and crashing waves. The discovery immediately raised alarm. The vehicle was completely destroyed, the fire deliberately set, and no trace of Christopher was found nearby. The scene felt staged, an attempt to erase evidence, to cut all threads connecting investigators to the truth. With no body, no witnesses, and no clear motive, the case slid quickly into uncertainty. Detectives combed the cliffs, beaches, and surrounding bushland. Boats were deployed along the coastline. Every known associate, friend, and relative was interviewed. The community rallied, searching farms, sheds, and roads stretching deep into Western Victoria. But Christopher had disappeared into a void. The absence of a body made the investigation one of the most difficult in the region's history. Rumours circulated through the town. Some believed Christopher had been taken far from Warrnambool. Others whispered about debts, disputes, or misunderstandings that spiraled out of control. For months, police pursued every possible lead, but each one collapsed. The case became cold, not for lack of effort, but because there was nothing substantial to hold on to. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with all its pieces missing. Years passed. Christopher's family lived with uncertainty, unable to grieve properly, lacking answers to the simplest but most painful questions. What happened? Where is he? Why was he taken? The mystery became part of Warrnambool's local law, a ghost story of the real world, tied not to superstition but to silence and fear. Then, more than 16 years later, movement finally came. In November 2022, police made a stunning announcement. 2 men, Glenn Ernest Fenwick and Stephen Frederick Johnson, had been charged in connection with Christopher Jarvis' disappearance. For a community that had waited so long, the news hit like a shockwave. After so many years, most had assumed the truth might never surface. Yet here it was, a sign that the long-dormant investigation had quietly revived. Detectives now believed that Christopher had not simply vanished, he had been killed. In the courtroom, details began to trickle out. Fenwick and Johnson were not strangers. They were connected to Jarvis through local circles. Their involvement hinted at a personal dispute, something sudden, explosive, and disastrous. The idea that Christopher could be killed by people he knew unsettled everyone who had followed the case. By 2024, the first major breakthrough came when Glenn Fenwick pleaded guilty to manslaughter. According to his admission, Christopher died during an altercation, one that spiraled out of control. Fenwick claimed panic overtook him, leading to the burning of the car, the cover-up, and the decision to hide Christopher's body. But even with his plea, critical details remain hidden. Fenwick never fully explained where Christopher's remains were taken or why the confrontation escalated into fatal violence. With Fenwick's guilty plea, the focus shifted to the second man, Stephen Johnson. Johnson's legal journey had been chaotic. He had been charged once before, then the charges were dropped, then reinstated after significant review of evidence. His alleged involvement, according to prosecutors, wasn't accidental. They believe Johnson played a central role in the killing, while Fenwick assisted in covering it up. The complexities of the case, conflicting statements, missing remains, gaps in their timelines, made prosecution extremely challenging. In 2025, Johnson's court hearings intensified. Prosecutors argued that Johnson bore primary responsibility for the killing, while Fenwick's plea confirmed that Christopher did not vanish on his own. For the first time, the public began to see a clearer picture. Christopher Jarvis had been lured or confronted, killed during a deliberate encounter, and disposed of secretly. His car was burned to eliminate evidence, and his body was hidden so effectively that it has never been found even after 19 years. Yet many questions remain unanswered. Why was Christopher targeted? Was the killing planned, or was it truly a moment of rage as one suspect claims? Where is Christopher's body? Did others help destroy evidence? The tragedy lies not only in the violence itself but in the long, brutal silence that followed, a silence that kept a family frozen in grief for nearly 2 decades. Today, the case of Christopher Jarvis stands as one of Australia's most haunting examples of a cold case revived by perseverance and time. The legal process continues, driven by investigators who refuse to let the disappearance fade into obscurity. Though Christopher's remains have never been recovered, the truth surrounding his fate has finally begun to take shape. For the Jarvis family, justice is not about headlines or court victories. It is about acknowledgement. It is about truth. It is about the world recognizing what happened to a man who walked out of his home one morning and never returned. The disappearance of Christopher Jarvis is a story of violence hidden under years of silence, a story that proves that even when the earth conceals its secrets, persistence can slowly pull them back into the light. On the afternoon of January 27, 2015, the Bayview district of San Francisco was caught in the usual rhythm of the day. Children returning from school, families preparing dinner, and neighbors gathering outside their homes to talk. Among them was 32-year-old Maria Lourdes Souza, a hard-working mother of 3, standing near the front of her home on Revere Avenue with her children close by. She had no reason to think danger was coming. It was still daylight, the street was familiar, and everything felt ordinary. Within minutes, that sense of safety would be destroyed. Around 4:15 p.m., 2 vehicles sped down the street, engaged in a violent confrontation. Witnesses later described the chaos. Engines revving, windows down, figures shouting, and then the sound that changed everything: gunfire. A hail of bullets erupted between the cars, turning a residential street into a battleground. Neighbors ducked behind walls, children screamed, and people scrambled for cover. But Lourdes had no time to react. She was struck by a stray bullet, a single, senseless shot that ended her life instantly. Her 3 children, standing just feet away, witnessed the moment their mother fell. What should have been a quiet evening in Bayview turned into a scene of horror. Police and medical teams arrived within minutes, but there was nothing they could do. A woman who had been simply living her life, caring for her kids, watching them play, had become the unintended victim of a conflict that had nothing to do with her. That day, the Bayview community realized how fragile life could be, how violence did not always target those involved but often took the innocent instead. The shooting was part of a double homicide. During the same incident, 38-year-old Dante Glenn, a passenger in one of the cars, was also killed. Detectives immediately began gathering evidence, interviewing shaken residents, and analyzing the vehicles involved. But the investigation ran into a wall almost immediately. Witnesses were scared. Drivers fled the scene. The story was tangled in silence, fear, and evasive answers. For Lourdes' family, the days after her death were filled with grief and disbelief. She was not involved in crime, gangs, or any kind of conflict. She was a mother who worked, cared for her children, supported her relatives, and tried to build a stable life. Her father, Jose Souza, spoke tirelessly about her kindness, her devotion, and the way she sacrificed everything for her children. To him, the loss was unbearable. He spent years fighting for her case to be reopened, demanding justice when the city seemed to forget. But as weeks turned into months and months into years, the investigation froze. There was no progress, no arrests, no strong leads. The case drifted into the category of cold cases, tragedies remembered only by the victims' families and by detectives who wished they could do more. The Bayview community moved on, at least on the surface. New families came in, streets changed, businesses opened and closed. But for the Souza family, time stood still. Lourdes' children grew up without their mother. Jose visited her grave, hoping that someday the truth would come out. As his health declined, he feared justice would never come, and he was right. He passed away before seeing the breakthrough he had prayed for. Then, nearly 10 years after the shooting, the silence finally cracked. In August 2025, San Francisco police announced a major development: the arrest of 34-year-old Anthony Tyree for the murders of both Lourdes and Dante Glenn. Tyree had been a suspect in the early stages of the investigation but lacked sufficient evidence to charge. Years later, with advances in forensic review, witness re-evaluations, and renewed pressure from the families, detectives found what they needed to reopen the case. The arrest brought shock, relief, and grief all at once. For Lourdes' children, now older, still carrying the trauma of 2015, the news felt like a long-awaited recognition of their mother's suffering. For the community, it was a reminder that justice, though slow and imperfect, can catch up even after years of silence. And for Lourdes' late father, who spent his final years begging for answers, the arrest came too late, but it fulfilled the promise he fought for. Details of the shooting, now being re-examined through court proceedings, paint a clearer picture of what happened that day. Tyree was allegedly involved in a targeted confrontation with individuals in the second vehicle. The shots were intended for rivals, but they missed their mark, striking an innocent woman standing outside her home. The randomness of it made the tragedy even more painful. Lourdes was not part of the conflict. She was simply in the wrong place at the worst possible moment. The Bayview district has seen many acts of violence, but the killing of Lourdes Souza became a symbol, a reminder that the impact of street violence does not stop at the intended targets. It radiates outward, touching families, children, and entire communities. Her death sparked conversations about safety, enforcement, and the responsibilities of those who choose violence. And now, a decade later, the case has reopened wounds but also brought long overdue accountability. For her children, justice is not a celebration. It is a confirmation that their mother's life mattered, that she was not forgotten, and that the system eventually listened. The arrest of Anthony Tyree is not the end of the story, but the beginning of closure. In court, the full truth may finally emerge. Why the shooting happened, who was involved, and how a simple afternoon turned into tragedy. Maria Lourdes Souza's story remains a heartbreaking reminder of how vulnerable innocence can be in the face of chaos. She did nothing wrong. She was a mother watching over her children. And yet her life was taken by a stray bullet fired by someone she had never met. 10 years later, her name is spoken again, not as a headline lost to time, but as a call for justice finally answered.